So first of all, print out your A4 sheet, the dungaree dress pattern. And for the dungaree with trousers, you're going to need to cut out this square, and just ignore this shape for now. So you're going to need to cut out this dungaree leg square, dungaree top, and if you want a pocket on your dungarees, the optional pocket, and you'll need to cut out the strap too. So I'm going to make these dungarees with this fabric. This piece is approximately 30 by 20 centimetres, and I'm going to mark the pieces so that the pattern is vertical. So I'm going to mark those onto the wrong side of the fabric. Just going to pin and mark, and I'm going to ensure all the way around that there is seam allowance of about 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre on both pieces. So now I have the two trouser pieces, the two dungaree top pieces with the markings on the wrong side and the seam allowance. If you're adding the optional pocket, then you'll need a piece again about 20 by 7 centimetres, and you'll need to do the same thing, is mark that out on the wrong side of the fabric, leaving a seam allowance. So the optional pocket piece is just slightly smaller than the dungaree top. So if you're making your dungarees with straps made from fabric rather than cord or ribbon, you need to get your long piece that you've cut from the pattern for the straps, just fold it lengthways and press with the iron, and then here you'll see your sewing lines that you made before you cut it out. You need to sew one end, depending on which turning tool you're using. If you're using a turning tool that requires a tube, as some of them do, then obviously just sew the outer line. But my turning tool requires one end to be closed, so I'm going to sew back stitch across there a couple of times, and then just sew all the way along here, leaving this end open in order to turn. And I'm going to repeat that with both of them. So I've sewn down the length of there and across the top, and with my thinnest turning tool I'm going to turn that right side out. Now don't hesitate to use something like cord, it still looks really lovely. If you're not sure about doing this, it is quite fiddly, and I'd say almost impossible unless you've got a turning tool of some description. So you don't hesitate to use ribbon or cord for the straps. I'm just going to turn that right side out, push the ends out, and I'm going to press that flat to make the straps. So your two pieces of fabric that you've got for the trouser part of the dungarees, you'll need to place them right sides facing, and then I'm going to sew with a machine just along the two outer edges on the lines marked for the sewing lines. So I'm just going to back stitch, go all the way up, back stitch, and then back stitch all the way up, back stitch. So I've sewn the two outer edges, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these to the iron and press these two seams nice and flat. So just use the tip of the iron and just press those flat down on themselves. So you've pressed those central seams, and I'm going to line them up in the centre. That's it. And you can press that flat if it helps. So now at the bottom of the fabric, because my pattern's facing up that way, I'm going to create a little hem all the way around. Now I always find the best way to do this is put your thumbs in and just fold it out on itself, and then just try and even that out. Make sure those central seams are aligned, make sure it's even and straight, and then press that flat. Now once it's pressed flat, it's actually easier to adjust it if you need to. If it needs just rolling, you can just kind of roll it so that it's even, and then press it again. Then the next step is to sew this hem. So So I'm going to start here at one of these central seams. Now, if you struggle with putting this on the machine, I put this on the machine and sew in a loop. But if you find that tricky, then you can just hand stitch. Just take your time and just do a little hand stitch all the way along in a loop all the way around. So I'm actually going to machine sew, and I'm going to start here and back stitch a few millimeters up from the bottom, and I'm just going to go very neatly, create a lovely little hem all the way around back to where I started, and back stitch again. So I've sewn around that bottom hem. Just going to trim all the loose threads, and then I'm going to press that flat again just to make sure it's a really nice neat edge. So now for the top end, I'm going to do a really similar thing, but this time it needs to be slightly bigger. So again, I'm going to fold that edge under with my thumbs inside and pull and stretch. But this time, for the top, for the waistband line, I'm going to be sewing down towards here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to be threading elastic through here. So this gap near here needs to be as wide as your elastic. I'm going to use a relatively, I think mine's 3 millimeters. So I'm going to sew my line here and all the way around. And I'm going to start here on one of these seams, and I'm going to sew all the way around like I did before with the hem, making sure to leave a centimetre-ish here to leave me plenty of room for my elastic all the way around. And then when I come back here, I'm not going to join up to where it was. I'm going to leave a gap of about a centimetre so I can thread the elastic through there. So for the elastic, you'll need to measure the individual waist of the little animal that you're making the dungarees for, because they can vary depending on how much you've stuffed, etc. So I'm going to pop this round his waist, and what you need to do is just overlap. You need a tiny bit of stretch, not too much so that it makes his tummy go in, but just a tiny bit of stretch. And then you mark where the 2 points meet, and then just trim leaving a few centimetres either side. So the next step is to make sure your 2 central seams are lined up, and that this bottom hem, so the bottom of the trousers, the waistbands up here, the bottom of the trousers, that they're really well aligned. Now this pattern piece that you had, you'll notice it's got this part here that you were to ignore up until this point. So you need to cut this out. So place it centrally so the bottom is lined up with the hem, and the centre of that arch meets this seam. Pin it into place and mark around the edge. Now obviously you wouldn't make a normal pair of trousers in this way, but it works really well for little creatures. And then repin that bit together, and then machine sew around this little arch, back stitching here, making sure that hem is really perfectly aligned. Back stitch over the edge, up over the arch really carefully, and back stitch over the edge. So now I've sewn around that arch, I'm going to unpin, and with my little snippy scissors I'm going to cut inside that arch, and I'm just going to do it carefully all the way around inside the stitching. There we go. Now, keeping that wrong side out, I'm going to thread the elastic. So the elastic that I've measured, I've inserted a safety pin at one end, and I'm going to thread that through the gap in the waistline that I created earlier, and I'm going to push it all the way around. It can be a bit tricky when you get to the seam part. You just have to fiddle with the end of the safety pin until it finds its way through. And sometimes the folds of the seam can block it. And then thread it all the way through until it comes back out that same gap. Pull it gently and just even out the waistline, and then find those two marks that you made before, align them and hand sew or machine sew them together at the alignment mark. So go over it several times to make sure it's really, really secure. And then snip the excess and just pull the waistband so that that end disappears into there, and then just fold over that, fold over the little gap, and just stitch over that gap to secure it. So now you can turn the little trousers right side out, trim off any threads, and then really importantly, press this seam out from inside and iron it flat. So press that seam from the inside and iron it flat. So to make your dungaree top, you've got your two pieces here. So your two straps, take one piece of fabric face up and the correct way up. I've got the open end of the strap here, and I'm going to place it just in from the edge. I'm going to do the same with this one. It is a bit fiddly, so you need to make sure that you get this right. So the open edges are aligned with the top piece of the fabric, so that's the correct way up. And then I'm going to take this piece, again making sure the fabric's facing the right way. I'm going to place it right side together on top, and very carefully, so as not to move those straps inside, I'm going to pin over the straps, so to sandwich the straps in between. And now I'm going to repeat that with this one. I'm just going to adjust that there, because what you need to do here, so they need to be sandwiched in, but you need to make sure that when you sew along this line that you're not going to sew over the strap. So the strap needs to be inside that line, but when you get to the top you are going to sew that strap into place. So the top of the strap should be underneath this line. So the side of the strap here should not be. When you sew there, it shouldn't be going over the strap at all. When you sew across the top, it should be securing those two straps into place across the top, and again down the side, not sewing any strap at all. So I've sewn around the top three sides, and what I'm going to do is just snip the corners so that when I turn it right side out, those corners are a bit more defined. Don't get too close, but you can just snip the corners slightly. And then I'm going to turn it right side out and pull. I'm just going to press the seams out and then I'm going to press that flat. So for the pocket, the optional pocket, you can just leave this as it is and nice and flat, or you could do a stitch around here just to neaten it out. But if you want to add the pocket, you place the fabric correct side together so you've got your sewing mark, pin it together, sew around the top 3 lines, just really straightforward, a nice boxy sew. Leave this open. So I've sewn the 3 sides of the pocket. I'm going to just trim diagonally the top 2 corners so that when they're folded right side out they're a bit more defined. I'm going to turn that right side out. I'm going to push the seams gently. So I've pressed that flat, and just across the top I'm going to do a single line of stitching. I'm just going to back stitch, single line of stitching across the top, back stitch. There we go. I'm going to take this piece that I've pressed. I'm simply going to place the pocket on the top where I want it to go. So I think about there looks right. I'm going to pin it into place. And then I'm just going to sew down here, back stitch, down here, back stitch. I'm going to leave this top part open so it is a proper pocket. There we go, sewn into place. I'm going to remove the pin, and as you can see it is a proper pocket. So I've put the trousers onto the doll that I'm making them for, and I've got the dungaree top part here. I'm just going to place them in there and just make sure that they're in the right place before I pin them and sew them. So that looks about right to me. So I'm going to pin that across there, but not through his tummy, so that I can remove them. And then I'm going to sew that into place. So what I'm going to do, don't worry too much about the elastic inside, there's plenty of stretch around the back. I've just simply stitched twice across there. So I'm going to just cut all the loose threads. I'm just going to press that seam flat there, and I'm going to put it onto the doll.